Hey YouTube, it's your buddy Drew from Living History's Mysteries and the Midwest Parahistoric Society. You know, so often on this channel, we try to find those interesting stories, those curiosities. And I'm always asking you guys, you know, if you have something that you'd like to hear about, just get a hold of us and let us know. We're more than happy to check it out. Somebody actually got a hold of us, and they wanted us to look at the history of a book. A book so widely desired by all kinds of people. Be them historians, be them people into the paranormal, be it practitioners of those certain arts. I'm talking about the Necronomicon. Where'd it come from? What's the history of it? Who wrote it? Today, we're going to take a look at the history of the Nec, maybe even try to check out one of the stories in it. And we're also going to hear from historians, podcasters, who've got a special guest who knows a little bit more about the Necronomicon and some of the stories inside it. This is going to be good. Stay tuned.
The history of the Necronomicon. Original title Al-Azif. Azif being the words used by Arabs to designate that nocturnal sound made by insects, supposed to be the howling of demons. Composed by Abdul al-Hazred, a mad poet of Sana'a in Yemen, who is said to have flourished during the period of the Umayyad Caliphs, circa 700 AD. He visited the ruins of Babylon and the subterranean secrets of Memphis, and spent 10 years alone in the great southern desert of Arabia, the Roba el-Khalia, or empty space of the ancients, and Dana, or crimson desert of the modern Arabs, which is held to be inhabited by protective evil spirits and monsters of death. Of this desert, many strange and unbelievable marvels are told by those who pretend to have penetrated it. In his last years, Al-Hazred dwelt in Damascus, where the Necronomicon, Al-Azif, was written, and of his final death or disappearance, 738 AD, many terrible and conflicting things are told. He is said by Ibn Khalikan, 12th century biographer, to have been seized by an invisible monster in broad daylight and devoured horribly before a large number of fright-frozen witnesses. Of his madness, many things are told. He claimed to have seen fabulous Irem, or city of pillars, and to have found beneath the ruins of a certain nameless desert town the shocking annals and secrets of a race older than mankind. He was only an indifferent Muslim, worshipping unknown entities whom he called Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu. In AD 950, the Azif, which had gained a considerable, though surreptitious, circulation amongst the philosophers of the age, was secretly translated into Greek by Theodorus Philetus of Constantinople under the title Necronomicon. For a century, it impelled certain experimenters to terrible attempts, when it was suppressed and burnt by the patriarch Michael. After this, it is only heard of furtively, but 1228, Olaus Vormius made a Latin translation later in the Middle Ages, the Latin text was printed twice. Once in the 15th century in black letter, evidently in Germany, and once in the 17th, probably Spanish. Both editions being without identifying marks, and located as to time and place by internal typographical evidence only. The work, both Latin and Greek, was banned by Pope Gregory IX in 1232, shortly after its Latin translation, which called attention to it. The Arabic original was lost as early as Borromeus' time, as indicated by his prefatory note, and no sight of the Greek copy, which was printed in Italy between 1500 and 1550, has been reported since the burning of a certain Salem man's library in 1692. An English translation made by Dr. D was never printed and exists only in fragments recovered from the original manuscript. Of the Latin texts now existing, one, 15th century, is known to be in the British Museum under lock and key, while another, 17th century, is in the Bibliothèque Nationale at Paris. A 17th century edition is in the Widener Library at Harvard, and in the library of Miskatonic University at Arkham. Also in the library of the University of Buenos Aires. Numerous other copies probably exist in secret, and a 15th century one is persistently rumored to form part of the collection of a celebrated American millionaire. A still vaguer rumor credits the preservation of a 16th century text in the Salem family of Pickman. But if it was so preserved, it vanished with the artist R.U. Pickman, who disappeared early in 1926. The book is rigidly suppressed by the authorities of most countries, and by all branches of organized ecclesiasticism. Reading leads to terrible consequences. It was from rumors of this book, of which relatively few of the general public know, that R.W. Chambers is said to have derived the idea of his early novel, The King in Yellow. Chronology. Al-Azif, written circa 730 AD at Damascus by Abdul al-Hazred. Translated to Greek 950 AD as Necronomicon by Theodorus Philetas. Burnt by Patriarch Michael 1050, i.e. Greek text. Arabic text now lost. Olaus translates Greek to Latin 1228. 1233 Latin edition and Greek suppressed by Pope Gregory IX. 1400s black letter printed edition Germany. 1500s Greek text printed in Italy. 1600s Spanish reprint of Latin text.
For those of you who don't know what the Necronomicon is, it is arguably the most famous fictional text ever created in the history of American literature. It is an evil book, yes, one might say, created by probably my favorite author, H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, I didn't realize this. You told me this. I
love Lovecraft. My favorite stories are Dreams in the Witch House, where he basically equates physics to witchcraft. Like, witches have an advanced grasp on physics.
Really?
It's awesome. Wow. It's so cool.
I have to read some of this stuff.
Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward is probably the greatest one he's ever written. It's amazing.
Really?
Yeah, you gotta read that.
And these are short stories? Novellas?
Well, the next one's a novella, At the Mountains of Madness. Excellent story.
I've heard of that one.
Actually, that one kind of factors into what we're going to be talking about today. I don't know if the Necronomicon makes an appearance, but what the Necronomicon deals with is all over the place there. So, Chuck, let's... despite my love of Lovecraft,
Yes.
it's painfully obvious to both of us that we're mere fleas compared to some other people out there who are Lovecraft fans, right?
The dogs.
And we figured that we were going to get nothing but angry emails for this one.
They take it pretty seriously, I would imagine. They don't want us to poop on their hero and their icon.
No, and he's my hero too, but I don't
do it justice.
No, I can't. So instead, we decided to bring in who we'll call the Shield, who can take all of the angry emails, and that is our friend, colleague, and fellow podcaster Jonathan Strickland.
Paramore?
Yes, we have a special guest today. Chuck wasn't lying; I was.
Yes.
So, hey, Strick, how's it going?
Hey there, guys. Going pretty well. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed writing both Cthulhu and the Necronomicon articles, so I'm
They're
thrilled
awesome.
to be here.
Very, very cool
Well,
articles.
you're kind of raised on these, weren't you? Doesn't your dad write weird fiction?
Yeah, my father's name's Brad Strickland, so if you were to do a search for that on Amazon, you would see that he's written quite a few novels, several of which fall into the horror or weird fiction category. So,
Right.
yeah, I grew up around this stuff.
This was your life.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
And your dad predicted Teddy Ruxpin.
That's true, but has nothing to do with Lovecraft or Cthulhu or the Necronomicon.
Right.
No, it doesn't.
My parents were school teachers, so not nearly as
My
exciting.
dad was a mechanical engineer.
I didn't grow up with Cthulhu and strange beasts that would drive you insane just to look upon its face.
Right. Yeah.
Lesson plans.
Which is something. It's a point that you make in the articles you wrote, Strick, was that these creatures that the Necronomicon deals with, they'll drive you crazy just by looking at them or by interacting with them. Usually, terrible things happen, right? And at the center of the Necronomicon is Cthulhu, or there's a pronunciation that Lovecraft wrote in a letter to a fellow author, right?
Yes.
And how is that one pronounced?
Why are you hitting me with that all of a sudden? Okay, let's be clear here. Lovecraft actually makes a point to say that these otherworldly creatures have their own language,
Right.
which humans are incapable of repeating.
I love that. That makes it very mysterious and creepy to me.
Yeah, it's the same sort of nature as they have this appearance that we cannot comprehend. If we were to look upon it, as you say, we would go crazy. So
Right.
it actually takes a lot of pressure off, because you can name things whatever you like. You can put as many consonants and little apostrophes in there, and so you can call it whatever you like. And when people say, how do you pronounce it? You just respond, you can't. But Cthulhu is one that I think most Lovecraft scholars would argue is the appropriate pronunciation.
Right.
The way I've always said it, and the way that most of the fans that I've talked to have always said it, is Cthulhu.
Right. Wasn't there a rumor early on that the Cloverfield movie was the monster was the Cthulhu?
Yeah, that was very early on when that preview first hit, and
Right.
there was not even a title for the movie yet.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, there was no title internally for the movie. People could only get little glimpses of what was going on, and a lot of people said, hey, maybe this is the Cthulhu movie we've all been waiting for.
Right.
This is actually the monster.
I wonder why I haven't made that yet.
Well, I think, there have been several movies that have tried to tap into the Lovecraft universe, and only a few have been really successful. I think part of the problem is that how do you portray a monster that is so horrible that you'd go crazy looking at?
That was what I was thinking. It's probably pretty intimidating for a filmmaker to try and tackle this.
Well, there are descriptions of Cthulhu.
Let's
right?
hear it.
So he has wings. He resembles.
You're saying he.
Just by looking at this, yeah. Think about this.
I just
Do
figured with Lovecraft.
you think feminine when you hear this? Wings, huge leathery wings.
Yes.
Part octopus.
Yes.
Part dragon.
Woman.
And part man.
No, I would say, it just seems like with Lovecraft's thing, he would say, it is a gender that cannot be defined.
Yeah, I would agree.
Unnameable.
Okay. So we'll call him he.
Okay, so we will call Cthulhu here. Okay, so Cthulhu, and the whole reason we're talking about him is he figures at the center of the Cthulhu mythos that Lovecraft created during the course of his writing. And Strickland, when was he most prolific? Was it during the 20s?
Yeah, we're talking about just right around that era, late 20s, pretty much. What's really interesting to me is that Cthulhu became the center figure of this mythos, but it's not the creature that Lovecraft wrote about the most. Cthulhu really only factors into a couple of stories, and in fact is described in some as being a priest kind of figure for the Old Ones, which is this race of creatures Lovecraft created.
Yeah, but he never said whether he was a priest that led the worship of the Old Ones, or whether he was the priest to the Old Ones.
That's correct. So that's,
I'm just going to leave the room. You guys are nerding out on me.
Well, the point I'm trying to make here is that it's really the fans of Lovecraft who kind of latched on to Cthulhu and made it the central figure of his mythology. If you were to read all the stories, you would say, why? I mean, it is a very striking kind of image, but why this over any other particular, like, why not a Shoggoth?
Is there a reason for that, or?
I think it's mainly because when you do read the descriptions, they are very compelling.
Right.
And I think it's also probably one of the ones that's easier to imagine than some of the other. A lot of the other ones end up being shapeless. Well, that's kind of hard to imagine.
That's no fun. Or mindless being, cosmic being who rules at the center of chaos. That's kind of difficult to conceive of.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's very hard to make a plush toy of that.
Mr. Marketer.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Necronomicon. Sure. So the text, Strickland, is often considered a book of spells. Most of the people who get their hands on the Necronomicon in Lovecraft stories end up using it to conjure some of the great old ones. Remember, Cthulhu's the priest of the great old ones.
Right.
And terrible, terrible things happen. The skies open up. People tend to disappear in under terrible circumstances. And the author, let's talk about the author of the Necronomicon. He himself, the mad Arab, Abdul al-Hazred.
That's correct. The mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred,
a.k.a. Opium Fiend.
Yes, the 8th century opium fiend
from Yemen.
Supposedly a poet who at some point gets this. Well, I suppose he gets some strange inspiration, possibly fueled by drugs.
Right.
And
that's a good way to say it.
Writes down this book called the Necronomicon.
Right. Originally called Al-Azif, right?
Right, and that refers to a sound made by night insects in the desert.
Or demons howling, depending on who you ask.
Right, that's correct. And so we have this text that's supposed to be very rambling and crazy, and interesting thing is that Lovecraft never wrote the full Necronomicon. He actually wanted to create it.
That's right, and dabbled on a shorter version at one point, right?
Right. He wrote a couple of passages from an abridged version, and there are a few passages that are fairly famous in Lovecraft lore. But he wanted to create this mythology where scholars in his world would have certain books they would refer to whenever they needed to study these creatures.
Okay. And some of those books actually were real, right?
That's correct. Some of the books were, in fact, real books that have a historical background. Most of them were just figments of his imagination. He created these Lovecrafts, I should say.
Sure.
Lovecraft's imagination.
Not the Mad Arab.
No, not the Mad Arab. So, yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about an author, Lovecraft, who creates this fictional author, the Mad Arab, who in turn creates a fictional book called the Necronomicon, parts of which Lovecraft actually wrote out.
Right. So that is the spoiler for those of you who weren't familiar with this at all. Necronomicon, completely fictional. Mad Arab, completely fictional.
And actually, what's cool about Strickland in the article, you make the point that the Necronomicon has not only survived Lovecraft's death, it's thrived. You can find versions of it on Amazon. There's actual cults, whether they realize that the Necronomicon or accept that the Necronomicon is fictitious, they still this philosophy of the Necronomicon still figures very much into their outlook. Then there's other maybe. I got the impression slightly nuttier cults that actually don't believe the Necronomicon is fictional, right? But it's pervaded into reality, correct?
Yeah, all of that is right. It is fascinating because since Lovecraft left such huge gaps with the Necronomicon, he only wrote little bits and pieces. It's allowed other people to swoop in and fill in those gaps
and make money.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I was in a bookstore. I was in I think it was South Carolina. I was in a bookstore. This is when I was a teenager, and I'm looking through the books. I'm just trying to find something to read. and I come across a copy of the Necronomicon, and I had to stop and look again because I thought, wait a minute, what? Why would I find a fictional book in a bookstore? And so I took it down and started reading it, and it was filled with lots of tortured kind of prose.
Was it good?
No, it was terrible.
Did it bite your hand when you tried to grab it?
It did not.
Evil Dead reference. We'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
No, it was a terrible book. It was a terrible attempt at trying to make a book sound really dangerous and spooky, but it was transparent. I mean, it was obvious that it was someone trying to do this. Right.
All right, you guys, this reality part's boring. Let's go back into the fictional world of Lovecraft and the Necronomicon.
Okay. Where are we?
Actually, we're in no particular place. We're just in this version of reality that Lovecraft created. How about that?
Okay.
All right. So within this world, you have various creatures. You have various books that all of which are bad. I mean, that's just there are people who think they can take advantage of them and gain either power or knowledge or some combination thereof, but it always turns out badly for them. In fact, you kind of wonder why people keep bothering.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's really what weird fiction is all about. You're talking, when you use the word weird, you don't just mean unusual. You mean incomprehensible to the human mind.
Yeah, I think Josh told me off mic that a lot of other authors kind of have said that's a bit of a cop-out on Lovecraft's part, because a lot of times he doesn't have to end up being real creative with his descriptions of things, and he can just say, well, trust me, look upon it and you shall go insane.
Or it's unnameable.
Yeah, or unnameable.
Yeah, and
I think it's brilliant.
There's definitely an argument on either side. You could argue that, well, the human imagination is so powerful that if you leave it up to the individual reader, that person is going to make his or her own most horrifying creature.
Right.
And there's nothing that you as the writer could describe because you don't know that person.
Right.
You don't know what would horrify that person.
Exactly.
But by leaving it up to the reader's imagination, suddenly you've made a much more effective monster.
Right, which is kind of what they did with Cloverfield, actually. They did kind of tap into that because they didn't show the monster very much at all. And I thought it was effective. I liked the movie.
No, I really enjoyed that as well.
I haven't seen it yet. Both of you shut up.
Oh, sorry.
Spoiler alert, there's a monster.
It's Godzilla.
Yeah.
Another thing I thought was cool was that Lovecraft at one point said that there are only several official copies of the Necronomicon located in, I think you listed 5 different libraries, and 2 of them don't even exist. So
That's right.
He dabbled so much.
Miskatonic.
Yes, he dabbled so much between reality and fiction that I think it worked. It ended up being like, you don't know what's real and what isn't.
Dude, we're back in Lovecraft's world. Okay, sorry.
Welcome back. Like I said in the beginning, no one really knew much about the book, but it took the world by storm when people started reading about it. And it actually became a desired book that witches, practitioners of both sides of the art, both light and dark, and all the spectrum of grays and blacks in between. Parahistoric investigators, paranormal investigators, historians, demonologists, everybody wanted to get a copy of this book. And of course, there was never really a human skin-bound edition that was really ever made. It's all fiction. H.P. Lovecraft was an amazing author, and he could draw people in with each and every story. He never really talked about the neck, but Cthulhu became an entity all to himself. You never know when you sit down to that typewriter and you start to write exactly how the things that are coming and going in your mind is going to affect the world around you clear into the future. I'm sure Lovecraft knew he had his fans and he was going to write epic adventures. But I bet he never thought for a second those adventures were are going to become a way of life, a belief in the real world outside of the pages of his books. But that's all I've got for you guys today. As always, keep sending your requests in, keep sending your ideas. We're more than happy to look into them for you if we can. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you, God love you, we do. Don't forget, we have got the Morton House investigation coming up next weekend. We're going to possibly do a cemetery the next weekend. The weekend after that is the Morris Performing Arts Center investigation in South Bend, Indiana. Summer's getting here. It's going to be fun. The weekend after the Morris Performing Arts Center, I'm going to be in Niles, Michigan at the Niles Ren Fair doing security again this year. Always fun hanging out with those folks. Watching the live sword fighting, seeing the weapons displays throughout history. Checking out the vendors, and especially checking out the food. Those folks know how to cook it up right. Not to mention, I'll be sitting in my camp when I'm not running security, making bacon jerky. So until next time, y'all take care. Happy hunting. God bless you. We'll see you on down the road.